A wild Mustang blocked a man's truck at dusk, not to attack, but to beg him for help. No one believed Elias Harper when he said a wild Mustang stopped him in the middle of the Montana plains, stood there trembling, eyes wide, as if begging a human for mercy. But that evening, under a fading sky and a wind that carried the scent of winter, Elias stepped out of his truck and realized the horse wasn't asking for help for herself at all. The last light of a Montana afternoon drifted low across the open range, turning the tall grass into slow-moving waves of gold. Elias Harper guided his old pickup down the dirt road that led toward his cabin, the engine humming a tired rhythm he'd grown used to over the years. Out here, the world stayed simple. No deadlines, no gutters of city noise, no reminders of the life he once had and could never get back. Just wind, dust, the occasional hawk circling overhead, and the quiet that wrapped itself around him like an old blanket. He had convinced himself he preferred it this way. Solitude never asked anything of him. The road curled past a stand of cottonwoods when something flickered at the edge of his vision. Elias eased his foot off the gas. A shape stepped out of the grass, tall, lean, shimmering in the amber light. At first he thought the dusk was playing tricks on him, but then the figure moved farther into the road, and he caught the unmistakable silhouette of a wild Mustang. Its coat, blue roan and dusted with the day's travel, seemed to swallow the fading sunlight, turning the animal into some phantom carved from storm clouds. Elias braked, hard. For a long moment he didn't move, neither did the horse. A Mustang should have bolted the second it heard the engine. That was their nature, flight before thought. Yet this one stood rooted in the center of the road, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Its head hung low, not in defiance, but in exhaustion. Something about the way it held itself, trembling, hesitant, sent a prickling sensation across Elias's skin. He cracked the driver's door open. Cold air rushed in, sharp with the scent of sagebrush and early frost. The horse flinched at the creak of the hinge, but didn't retreat. Instead, it took a single step toward him, then stopped, hooves sinking softly into the dust. Its ears tilted forward, and its eyes, a deep dark brown, fixed on him with an intensity that made his throat tighten. Elias stepped out slowly. "Easy now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the horse or himself. The Mustang dipped its head. Not in warning, not in fear, in something closer to a plea. A strange, quiet unease gripped him. He had worked with hundreds of horses in his lifetime, domesticated ones, stubborn ones, ones that tossed their heads and snorted clouds of dust when they didn't want a saddle near them. But this was different. This wasn't a creature choosing a man. This was a creature driven to him. Wind brushed past them, rattling the tall grass. The horse shifted its weight, and only then did Elias notice the stain along its left flank. A dark streak trailing down its ribs, half dried, half fresh. Not a wound from a fence or a rock. Something else. Something with intention. His chest tightened. "Someone did this to you?" he whispered. The Mustang lifted its head as if answering him, breath quivering in the cold. Then it turned slightly, not away from him, but sideways, exposing the injured side fully, as if showing him the proof he had asked for. Elias's pulse thudded in his ears. He stepped closer, hands open, palms visible. It had been years since he'd approached any horse, let alone a wild one. His heart wasn't ready, not after the accident, not after the grief that swallowed every inch of his life, but something in those dark eyes pulled him from the edges of his own reluctance. "You're hurt," he said softly, "and you came here? Why? What are you trying to tell me?" The Mustang let out a low, trembling breath. Then it turned and took a few steps away from the truck, slow, dragging, but purposeful. After a short distance, it stopped and looked back, waiting. Elias froze. He recognized the motion. Not random, not fearful, intentional. He had seen horses do it before, long ago, when they wanted their handler to follow them. But no wild mustang should ever ask for such a thing. The horse took another step, gaze fixed on him. A gust of wind rolled across the plain, carrying the distant cry of a hawk. The world felt so impossibly still that Elias could hear the soft crunch of hooves against the frost-stiffened earth. "Is that it?" he whispered. "You want me to come with you?" The mustang blinked slowly, then lifted its head once more in that same urgent, weary motion. A plea. Elias's breath fogged the air. Every instinct told him to get back in the truck, drive the last mile home, warm up a can of soup, and forget he'd ever seen this. But another part of him, the part he'd spent years burying, stirred awake. The part that remembered the thrill of a horse's trust. The part that remembered a child's laughter riding bareback across a summer field. The part that remembered a day that should have ended differently. He swallowed, jaw tightening. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me." He grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, shut the truck door, and followed the mustang off the road and into the whispering grass. The ground sloped gently downward toward the mouth of a shallow ravine, shadows pooling thick between the rocks. The horse kept glancing back at him, urging him forward even as its legs wobbled with each step. "What happened out here?" Elias muttered, scanning the horizon. "Where are the others? Mustangs don't wander alone." The breeze shifted, carrying the faint metallic hint of fear, if fear had a scent. A strange tension thrummed through the air. The kind. That makes a man look over his shoulder even when he knows nothing is there. The mustang halted near a cluster of boulders and stomped the ground with a desperate energy Elias hadn't seen before. Its ears flattened against its skull. Its breath came out in short bursts. Elias raised his flashlight. At first he saw nothing but stone and brush. Then movement. A small, trembling shape pressed deep inside a narrow crevice. A sound so soft it could have been mistaken for wind slid through the rocks. A tiny, frightened whimper. Something inside the darkness was struggling to breathe. Elias knelt, and when the beam finally landed on the trapped foal, shivering, wedged between jagged stone, eyes wide with terror, Elias felt his heart stumble. "Oh, sweetheart," he breathed, "you brought me here for this." Behind him, the mustang exhaled a low, aching sound, a mother's sound, raw and trembling. Elias looked back at her, at the wound on her flank, at the trembling in her legs, and finally understood the truth, pressing against the cold evening air. She wasn't begging for herself. She was begging for her child. He steadied his breath, settling his hand carefully on the rock's edge. "All right," he whispered, voice almost breaking with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I've got you, both of you." But even as the words left him, something distant echoed across the range, faint but unmistakable, the heavy, rumbling beat of approaching hooves. The sound carried a warning, and the night, once quiet, grew suddenly very still. The rumble of distant hooves faded into the wind, leaving the ravine wrapped in an uneasy silence. Elias stayed crouched near the crevice, one hand braced against the cold stone, the other hovering just inches from the frightened foal wedged deep inside. Its flanks shuddered with every breath, each tremor a small, desperate effort to stay alive. The mother, her blue roan coat trembling in the fading light, stood just behind him, head lowered as though every ounce of strength she had left was poured into keeping her child in sight. Her wound glistened faintly, dark against her ribs, but she didn't step back, not even when Elias shifted closer to her baby. "Easy," he murmured to the foal, voice low enough to blend with the rustling grass. "I've got you now." The animal blinked, its lashes thick with dust, and gave a soft cry that barely made it out of its throat. It wasn't fear, it was exhaustion. A surrender only the very young make when the world becomes too heavy. Elias angled the flashlight deeper into the crevice. A narrow wedge of stone pinned the foal's right hind leg. Not broken yet, but it wouldn't survive the cold night trapped like this. The mother sensed his focus, stepping close enough that her breath whispered warmth across his shoulder. He felt the tension in her muscles, the way she quivered, not from fear of him, but from fear for the little one. That kind of fear he knew too well. The last time Elias Harper had knelt beside someone so small, so fragile, it had been his daughter. A memory flickered, her boot caught in the stirrup, her tiny voice calling his name, his hands trembling as he tried to lift her free. He never reached her in time. The ground had taken her, and with her, the man he used to be. For years afterward, he avoided anything with hooves, anything that stirred the echo of that loss. But tonight, kneeling beside the trapped foal, he felt the same cold weight settle in his chest, the same crushing knowledge that a life depended on what he chose to do next. He forced the memory back where it lived, deep, locked, untouched. Tonight wasn't about the past. Tonight was about the living. "Okay," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're going to get you out of here." He pressed his palms against the outer edges of the boulder. The stone was solid, wedged deep into the earth, resistant to even the full weight of his body. He shifted, tried again, gritting his teeth. Nothing. His breath misted the air. Montana evenings could snap cold faster than a man expected, and the foal's body already felt chilled beneath the thin sheen of sweat along its coat. He reached into his jacket, found the old tool knife he always carried. Not enough to pry the rock loose, but enough to carve away some of the soil, wedging it in place. The earth was dry, compacted from years of wind. He scraped slowly, careful not to shower the foal with dirt. Each slice loosened the stone a fraction at a time. The mother stayed close, her nose brushing the foal's flank in soft encouragement. Elias caught the sound she made. Half breath, half prayer. Something in it tugged at him. "You're doing good," he murmured. He didn't realize he was speaking the same words he'd once told his daughter during her first pony ride. Words that once carried innocence. Tonight they carried hope. As the minutes passed, the stone shifted under his elbow, just a couple millimeters, but enough to set his pulse racing. He dug harder, muscles burning. The Mustang stepped to the side, giving him room, though she never took her eyes off the foal. Her trust wasn't blind. It was desperate, and that weighed heavier than any stone. Finally, with one firm push, the rock rolled a few inches, just enough for him to wedge his fingers beside the foal's leg. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, as gently as any father might. "Lift with me." The foal whimpered, shifted, and Elias guided its leg free. The small creature's body sagged into his palms. He lifted it out, cradling it to his chest, its heart fluttering like a trapped bird. Its coat smelled of dust, cold air, and something faintly sweet, milk maybe, or the scent of the mother who hovered anxiously behind him. The mare stepped close. Her muzzle touched the foal's head, giving a soft nudge. The foal responded with a weak nicker, its ears twitching. Elias let them touch. A brief reunion that felt almost sacred. The mother looked up at him again, not with fear, but with a quiet, soul-deep gratitude that made the back of his throat tighten. "You're welcome," he whispered, though the wind stole most of the sound. He inspected the foal's leg gently. No break, just swelling, tenderness, a bit of scraped hide. Injured, but alive. The mother circled slightly, positioning herself protectively around the baby, even though her own legs trembled. Elias noticed how she kept glancing toward the ridge where the hoofbeats had echoed moments earlier. She wasn't done worrying, not yet. The Mustang nudged him once, firm, urgent, then looked toward the open plain. Elias understood the message the way a man understands a sudden shift in weather. Something was out there, something coming, something she feared enough to risk approaching a human. He slid an arm under the foal's chest again and rose, pressing the small body gently against his jacket to share his warmth. The foal relaxed against him, eyes fluttering shut. The mare gave a restless whinny, her hooves dancing over the ground, torn between motherly instinct and rising unease. "All right," Elias murmured. "Let's get you someplace warm." They climbed out of the ravine slowly. The grass brushed against his thighs, whispering in nervous tones, as though it, too, sensed the night shifting. He felt the mare's presence just behind him, close enough to touch, far enough to remain wild. Her steps were uneven, the wound along her flank seeping a thin line of darkness down her leg. She was hurting more than she let on. When they reached the road, moonlight spilled faint silver across the dirt. Elias carried the foal closer to his truck, but the mother lunged suddenly, blocking his path, breath flaring hard, eyes wide. Not aggression, fear, panic, protectiveness. "You think I'm taking it away?" he said softly. The mare's ears twitched. Elias stepped back, lowering the foal toward her. She pressed her face against its neck, calming instantly. When he lifted the foal again, she followed, this time without resistance. "You stay with us," he promised quietly, "both of you." He opened the truck's back door. The foal stirred at the sound, blinking up at him with long lashes. The mare breathed hard, eyes darting between Elias and the shadowed horizon. Something still haunted her, something that hadn't shown itself yet, but lingered in the edges of the night. He settled the foal into the truck bed, wrapping an old wool blanket around its flank. The mother stood just outside, head inside the open door, refusing to look away from her child. Elias reached out, laying a gentle hand against her neck. Her skin twitched beneath his touch, nervous, uncertain, but she didn't pull away. "You're safe," he said. But the wind shifted again, carrying a low, rhythmic thud, hooves pounding, closer this time, no longer faint. The mare stiffened instantly. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Someone, or something, was coming. And the night around them felt far too fragile to hold it back. The sound came again, closer now, heavier, deliberate. Not the scattered rhythm of a wandering animal, but the measured, territorial stride of something that owned the land beneath their feet. The mare's muscles tightened beneath her blue roan coat, her breath slicing the cold air in sharp, frightened bursts. She took one step toward her foal in the truck bed, then another toward the darkness beyond the road, torn between staying and running. Elias knew that tension, the instinct to split in half, to be in two places at once. It was the same instinct that had nearly broken him years ago. He kept one hand on the mare's neck, steadying her trembling. "Easy," he whispered, though his own pulse was thudding in his ears. His flashlight beam skimmed across the grass, catching only the sway of tall stalks bowing under the evening wind. The footsteps paused. A silence followed, an eerie, thick pause that stretched the night thin. Then the mare turned, slowly, her body angling toward the open plain, as if pulled by something only she could sense. She stepped away from the truck, then looked back at Elias, eyes wide, pleading. He didn't speak, but something inside him answered her anyway. He understood what she was asking. Follow me. Not for me, for him. Her gaze flicked toward the foal. Then she pushed forward into the grass with a halting, painful stride. Elias hesitated only a second before grabbing his flashlight and following her. The mare limped ahead, her steps uneven but determined. The land dipped gently, leading them away from the road and deeper into the wild stretch of sage and tall wheatgrass. The moon, still low, cast a soft silver film across everything it touched, washing color from the earth until the world felt made of smoke and breath. Elias moved steadily behind the Mustang, the cold brushing against his jaw, the soft rustle of grass the only sound between them. "What are you taking me to?" he murmured. He didn't expect an answer, yet the mare flicked an ear back as though acknowledging his voice. She moved in short bursts, stopping every dozen steps to glance behind her. Elias realized she wasn't checking on him. She was checking on the foal she'd left in the truck. Even wounded, exhausted, barely able to stand, she was still listening for his cry. A pang of something old and tender pushed through his ribs. It had been years since he'd walked beside a horse, years since he'd allowed himself to match his breathing with the soft rise and fall of a four-legged creature's steps. Tonight he found himself remembering the rhythm, the way the world seemed steadier when you synchronized with something larger than yourself. Strange how memory crept in when the night grew quiet. The mare slowed as they reached a narrow ravine of low, stone walls carved by years of wind. A faint path cut through it. Hoof tracks, fresh and not hers. Elias knelt, brushing his fingers gently across the imprints. Larger, sharper, shallower in the heel, heavier in the toe. A stallion marking his path, staking his claim on this land. He'd seen such markings 1,000 times in his younger years. Iron Crest, or whatever name the ranchers might have whispered, had passed here recently, and the mare knew it. She stood at the mouth of the ravine, head high despite her trembling, her breath fogging the dim air. Elias rose slowly, lifting the flashlight. Its narrow beam reached only a few yards into the darkness. But he could see enough. Broken shrubs, churned patches of dirt, the scarred bark of a juniper, bore signs of a fight. A recent one. "So this is what happened to you," he said softly. The mare didn't move, but her flank trembled. Her stance angled not toward the ravine, but toward the invisible line she refused to let anything cross. A mother guarding memory, trauma, territory. The place where the chase had begun. Elias stepped closer, noticing the way she shifted slightly to allow him past, as if trusting him to understand something she didn't have the strength to show again. He swept the flashlight farther. The ravine widened ahead, the ground sloping downward into a shallow basin. Sagebush lay flattened in long swaths, the kind of disturbance made when a foal had stumbled, maybe fallen. The mare followed his gaze, then took a few unsteady steps into the basin, her head lowering as she sniffed the earth. Elias crouched beside her. His hand hovered near the ground, brushing the faint impression of small hooves. Not the foal in the truck. These tracks were older, lighter, made before the mare had brought her child near enough to become trapped. "You ran," he murmured. "He chased you, and you circled back to find him." The mare's breath hitched. She nudged the ground gently with her muzzle, as though seeking the memory of her foal's scent. Elias watched her quietly. There was something unbearably human in the way she bowed her head, something that touched a place he'd sealed off long ago. A sudden shift in the wind carried a sharp scent, sweat, dust, dominance. The mare snapped her head up, ears arrowing toward the northern flank of the ravine. Elias lifted his flashlight, sweeping the darkness. Nothing. But he felt it too, the presence of something watching. "We should get back," he whispered. The mare didn't resist when he turned toward the road. She followed, limping heavily, but each time he looked over his shoulder, she was closer than before, pressing forward with a quiet urgency. Not because she feared for herself, because every second spent here was one more second away from her foal. When the truck finally came into view, the foal lifted its head weakly from the wool blanket, letting out a soft nicker. The mare answered with a trembling rumble, almost collapsing into a trot, despite the pain radiating through her side. She reached the truck door and pressed her face to the foal's cheek, breathing him in. Elias stood back, watching the reunion as though witnessing a truth he'd forgotten humans ever shared. Love without condition, fear without pride, devotion without words. He had once known these things with his daughter. He had once held her when she cried after falling in the barn's soft hay, her tiny hands clutching his shirt. He had once lifted her onto the back of a gentle mare and promised her the world was wide and safe. A lie he hadn't meant to tell, but one he could never take back. Tonight, something in the mare's trembling breath reminded him of that promise. Broken, buried, but not forgotten. He stepped forward quietly. "Let's get you both home." The mare didn't fight when he guided her toward the back of the truck, her body swaying, but her eyes never leaving her foal. Elias wasn't sure how he'd managed to get her inside without spooking her. But as he lowered the tailgate gently, she surprised him. She stepped forward on her own, slowly, painfully, following her child. 1 foot. A pause. Another foot. A long breath. Then she climbed inside and settled beside the foal, letting its small head nestle beneath her chin. Elias stood there for a moment, startled by the quiet gravity of it all. He had seen horses cooperate with humans before, but never like this, never with such trust. As he closed the tailgate and circled to the driver's seat, a low wind carried another faint tremor of hoofbeats across the plain. Distant but deliberate, a warning, a reminder that the night wasn't theirs alone. Elias glanced in the side mirror. The mare lay curled protectively around her foal, her eyes half-lidded but still alert, still listening for dangers she could not fight. "Don't worry," he whispered, turning the key in the ignition. "I'm listening too." The engine rumbled to life, the headlights cutting a path through the restless grass. As the truck eased forward, the Mustang mother lifted her head and watched the darkness behind them fade. She didn't know where Elias was taking her. She didn't know if she would survive the journey. But for the first time that night, she rested her head and closed her eyes. She believed, for a moment, that someone else could protect her child. The road ahead stretched in a thin, pale line beneath the pickup's headlights, carving through the Montana night like a quiet promise. Elias gripped the steering wheel loosely, letting the truck roll over the uneven dirt, his eyes flicking often to the rearview mirror. In the dim interior glow, he could see the foal curled in the wool blanket, and the mother pressed tightly beside it, her breath rising in slow, weary waves. Every few seconds she lifted her head, just slightly, to make sure her baby was still there. Then she'd lower it again, surrendering to a fatigue so heavy it seemed to pull even the air down with her. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the plain in long, steady strokes. The tall grass bowed under it, rustling like the quiet hush of a crowd waiting for something to break. The truck's tires hummed. The world moved, but the night itself felt held in place, tense, watchful. The foal let out a small, broken nicker. It was barely a sound, little more than a vibration in the air, yet it made the mother shift anxiously, her ears flicking back, her muscles tightening. Elias slowed the truck. "It's all right," he murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him from the bed. Still, the words left him, soft and instinctive. "He's safe. You're safe." He pulled off the main trail toward a narrow stretch of land where the terrain dipped gradually, giving him a short reprieve from the relentless wind. The engine settled into a low idle. Elias stepped out and walked to the back, boots crunching lightly through the frost-hardened dirt. When he lowered the tailgate, the mare raised her head in alarm, but he kept his movements slow, palms open, voice steady. "I'm just checking on him," he said. The foal stirred, blinking at the sudden disturbance. Its breathing remained shallow, but less frantic than before. Elias reached in, running gentle fingers along the injured leg. Bruised, swollen. But the bone felt straight beneath the thin layer of trembling muscle. The foal leaned into his touch. Its trust was instinct, pure, delicate, unfiltered. Something about that innocence made Elias's chest contract. The mare shifted, watching him closely. Her wound glistened in the cold light, no longer streaming fresh blood, but still seeping in small, stubborn lines. "You're hurting, too," he whispered. "You're the one bleeding, but he's the one you're worried about." For a moment, the mare's eyes locked with his. There was a vulnerability there, a kind of ancient exhaustion he recognized too well. The quiet kind that people rarely speak of, but carry for years. Elias knew that weight. He had lived in its shadow since the day he lost everything that once gave his life color. He shifted his attention to the foal. "Let's fix what we can." Bowling down again, he eased the foal toward the edge of the truck, placing it carefully onto his lap while he worked. The creature pressed its face against his coat, warm breath spilling into the fabric. The closeness startled something old inside him, something he'd buried so deep he thought it had died. For an instant he felt the memory of his daughter's cheek against his chest, the way she used to fall asleep wrapped in his jacket on cold morning rides. A memory that returned uninvited and cut sharp. He swallowed hard and pressed on. From the first aid kit he kept under the seat, he wrapped the foal's leg with a soft bandage, securing it without tightening too much. The foal twitched at the touch, then relaxed again. Healing would take time, but it had time now. He made sure of it. The mare leaned forward, brushing her muzzle along her baby's neck. The tenderness of the gesture pulled at him with a force he didn't expect. Animals didn't hide their love the way people did. They didn't mask fear with anger or grief with silence. They lived truthfully, painfully, always in the open. In another life, Elias might have envied them. A sudden gust burst across the plain, rattling the nearby brush and carrying with it something else. The faint, unmistakable echo of hooves, heavy, pounding, coming from the northern rise. The mare jerked up, body tensing hard enough to shake the truck bed. Elias's instincts surged. He stepped between her and the open air. "Easy, I know." His voice was quiet, but inside, something colder tightened its grip. He turned the flashlight toward the hill. Nothing moved there. Not yet. But he could feel it, the invisible pressure of a presence watching, waiting, claiming. He looked back at the mare. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Her ears stood upright, angled sharply toward the ridge, as if listening to the memory of a threat she had barely escaped. So that was it, the reason she came, the reason she pushed through pain and instinct to stand in front of a stranger's truck. The reason she dragged herself across the plain, bleeding, shaking, exhausted, determined. She had been running from something that didn't stop chasing. "You want me to move," Elias whispered. He didn't need her to nod. The urgency in her trembling flank said enough. The foal let out a weak cry at the sudden tension, and the mother answered instantly, a soft rumble echoing from deep in her chest. Elias lifted the foal gently back into the truck bed, nestling it against the blanket. "I'm not leaving you two out here." He climbed into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. The headlights stretched across the plain in two bright, steady beams. When he checked the mirror again, the mare had lowered herself protectively around her baby, her body forming a curved shield. Her eyes never left the ridge. "Okay," he murmured, tightening his grip on the wheel. "I'll take you somewhere he can't reach you." The truck rolled forward over the frozen earth, bouncing gently along the uneven trail. Behind him, the mare stayed huddled around the foal, her breath rising slowly now, as though she felt a sliver of safety for the first time in hours. Still, the plains around them didn't relax. The wind shifted again. The dark felt heavier. A presence trailed somewhere behind, out of sight, but not out of mind. Laius drove on, carrying mother and child deeper into the night, past the ridge where shadows gathered like watchers. It was only when he passed the old split-rail fence, bordering a forgotten grazing field, that the foal finally drifted into a restless sleep. But the mare did not. She stayed awake, listening, guarding, trusting a man she had never met to protect the only life she had left. And for the first time in many years, Elias felt the weight of a vow forming in his chest, quiet but unbreakable. Whatever hunted them tonight would not take that foal, not while he still drew breath. The old pickup climbed steadily toward the ridge, its headlights slicing through the cold Montana dark. Elias could feel the night thickening behind him, not with weather, but with presence. Something was out there, something pacing the edges of the plain, matching the truck's slow climb. The mare must have sensed it long before he did, for she stayed rigid in the truck bed, her breath sharp, her ears pinned toward the back window. She wasn't merely alert, she was bracing herself. Elias had seen that posture before, in another life, horses tightening like bowstrings right before a threat revealed itself. Back then, it had been a mountain lion that stalked the ranch herd. Tonight, he didn't know what waited in the dark, but the mare did. And the fear in her body wasn't the frantic fear of prey. It was the protective fear of a mother, a different shape entirely. The truck crested the rise just as the moon parted the thin veil of clouds. The silver glow stretched across the open field below, revealing patches of brush tangled in shadow, the silhouettes of cottonwoods bending in the wind, and faint lines carved into the dirt by hooves, fresh ones, deep ones. Elias slowed. The foal stirred beside its mother, letting out a small, questioning sound. The mare answered with a soft rumble, low and trembling. It was reassurance, but it was also a warning, a reminder to her child that danger was nearer than comfort. Elias's breath fogged against the windshield. He had no weapon, no flare, no backup. Just an old truck, a wounded mare, a fragile foal, and the quiet belief that doing the right thing still counted for something. He wasn't sure if that belief was wisdom or foolishness. But as he looked at the mare's trembling outline behind him, he knew turning back wasn't an option. He eased the truck onto flatter ground and stopped. "Let me take a look," he said under his breath, though no one could hear him except the night itself. When he stepped out, the cold hit harder, threading its way under his coat like thin knives. The silence was immense, too immense. Even the usual nocturnal noises seemed to hold back, pressed into the edges of the plain, as though unwilling to interfere. Elias took a few cautious steps away from the truck, sweeping his flashlight beam over the ground. Tracks crossed the earth in looping arcs, some large and deep from the mare's frantic retreat, others tighter, sharper, more deliberate. Stallion tracks. A dominant Mustang moved with that kind of weight and intention, the kind that claimed terrain, not merely traveled it. The mare shifted in the truck bed, letting out a whinny so soft it barely broke the quiet. Elias turned to her. "I'm right. Here," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." The words came easily, though he hadn't said them to anyone or anything in years. They left him with a strange heaviness, as if they carried old promises with them, ones broken and buried long ago. He turned back toward the tracks, following them a few yards until the ground sloped toward a shallow dip. From there, the moonlight revealed a wide arc of trampled weeds, evidence of a struggle. The earth was scuffed and torn, clumps of soil kicked up, a few scattered hairs caught on a low sagebush. Blue-roan hair. The mare's. "You fought," Elias whispered. "You tried to protect him." A faint shift of air brushed the back of his neck. Not wind. Movement. He spun, flashlight sweeping across the brush. At first, there was only darkness. Then the darkness moved. A shape emerged from the cottonwoods, broad-chested, neck arched, mane rippling like black fire in the wind. A Mustang stallion stepped into the open, his body gleaming under the moon with a quiet, terrifying authority. His eyes fixed on Elias with a cold, razor-sharp intelligence, then flicked to the truck behind him. Iron Crest. Elias had never seen him before, but he recognized him instantly. The stallion let out a deep, warning snort, a sound that vibrated through the ground. His hooves pawed at the earth, not in fear, but in agitation, in dominance. This was his land, his herd, and he had chased the mare and foal once already, tonight. Elias stepped slightly sideways, putting himself between Ironcrest and the truck. He didn't think. His body simply moved, the way it once had when instinct guided him more than grief. He had no plan, no sense of what a man without so much as a rope could do against 1,000 pounds of raw muscle. But leaving the mare and foal undefended was not an option. Not anymore. The stallion's head rose higher, his ears flattened. He advanced one slow step at a time, each one a threat of its own. Elias felt as if he were standing on the shore, watching a wave rise from the dark, about to break. "Easy," Elias whispered, not to the stallion, but to himself. The words steadied him, framed the moment, reminded him why he'd followed the mare in the first place. He lifted the flashlight and angled it low, away from Ironcrest's eyes. Direct light would only escalate him. Elias knew that much from his years around horses. The stallion stopped. His tail flicked once, a warning. He was calculating, measuring the human in front of him. Behind him, the mare released a soft, anxious cry. Ironcrest's ears twitched at it. His gaze sharpened. Elias's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "No," he muttered, stepping fully into the stallion's direct line of sight. "Not tonight." The mare's fear had brought Elias here. But something else kept him rooted in place now, something older than his grief, something that refused to yield to the night. Ironcrest stomped, shaking the earth. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the mare's blood to the stallion, and that decided it. Ironcrest's posture snapped taut, his body coiled. He was about to charge. Elias tightened his grip around the flashlight, the beam wobbling for a moment as adrenaline surged. He had survived many hard things in his life, some physical, most emotional, but he was no match for a stallion defending his dominance. Except he wasn't defending dominance. He was hunting the foal. That knowledge ignited something fierce inside Elias, something he hadn't felt since the day he lost his child, and the world lost its meaning. Tonight, meaning surged back, sharp and undeniable. Before Ironcrest could lunge, Elias raised his voice, stronger than he'd expected it to be. "Hey!" The sound shattered the night, clean, loud, commanding. It carried across the plain, bouncing off the stone ridge and sweeping through the grass like a sudden break in a storm. Ironcrest hesitated. A single second. But a second was enough. Elias took a step toward the stallion, not away, but toward. His boots hit the earth with a steady, fearless rhythm. His posture widened, making him larger. Horses respected size. They respected certainty. They responded to conviction, even if they didn't understand words. And in that moment, Elias didn't just look certain. He was certain. "I'm not running," he said quietly, breath frosting in the air. "Not tonight. Not this time." Ironcrest tossed his head, mane whipping in a dark arc. His tail slashed the air. He pawed the ground again, harder. But he did not charge. Instead, he stepped back once, muscles still taut, breath streaming from his nostrils in furious clouds. The mare behind Elias made a trembling sound, a sound of shock, of fear, of relief, so thin it was almost nothing. Ironcrest paced several feet to the right, snorting, stamping, kicking up cold soil in frustrated bursts. He wasn't done, not by any measure, but he was waiting, measuring his next move. Elias held his ground, every muscle quivering, every breath a test of resolve. Somewhere deep inside the night, a new sound broke the tension, the faint hum of an engine approaching. Headlights appeared on the distant rise, climbing slowly toward them. Ironcrest's ears snapped up, his attention split. The stallion backed farther into the darkness, uncertain of the new threat. One last warning snort cut across the plain before he turned sharply and vanished into the brush, leaving nothing but the fading echo of his hoofbeats. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His knees nearly buckled. Behind him, the mare let out a long, trembling exhale. The approaching headlights grew brighter. Jonah Rivers. Help had arrived. And Elias realized, with a quiet, aching clarity, that for the first time in years, he hadn't run from something terrifying. He had stood his ground. For a mare who couldn't. For a foal who wouldn't survive without him. For a promise he hadn't spoken yet, but already felt shaping in his chest. He wasn't done. The night wasn't done. But something inside him had shifted. A man who had spent years trying to disappear had stepped back into the world. Jonah's white conservation truck rolled to a stop 20 yards from Elias's pickup, its headlights washing the ridge in a wide arc of pale gold. The night finally had a second heartbeat. The engine rumbled low, steady, like a quiet reassurance. Elias stood perfectly still, every muscle humming with the fading echo of what had just happened. The mare, curled protectively around her foal in the truck bed, lifted her head at the new sound, but she didn't bolt. She didn't even flinch. She just watched, breath trembling, as though unsure whether this new arrival meant safety or another danger. Jonah climbed out slowly, boots crunching through the frost-tipped grass. He saw Elias first, then followed his line of sight to the place where the stallion had vanished. "Jesus," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "Tell me that wasn't who I think it was." "It was," Elias said. His voice came out steady, but the remnants of adrenaline still pulsed in his fingertips. "Ironcrest." Jonah blew out a long breath, the kind a man releases when he realizes the ground beneath him could have given way. He shouldn't be this far east. He swept his flashlight across the ridge. And he sure as hell shouldn't be chasing a mare with a newborn. "He's claiming territory," Elias said, turning toward the mare, "or running off a rival's young." Jonah didn't argue. He didn't have to. Anyone who'd spent enough time among wild mustangs had seen what dominance could turn into. A kind of natural cruelty, unthinking but unstoppable, driven by old instincts that made harsher decisions than humans ever could. Elias walked to the back of his truck and lowered the tailgate again. The mare lifted her head but didn't try to stand. Her legs shook beneath her even in rest. The foal shifted beneath her chin, letting out a soft, sleepy sound, too worn to fear anything anymore. Jonah approached slowly, careful not to crowd the mare. "She's in bad shape," he murmured. "That wound's deeper than it looks." "I know," Elias said. "She still won't leave him." Jonah nodded. "Of course she won't." He leaned a little closer, keeping his body angled sideways, non-threatening, predictable, the position a man takes when he wants an animal to believe he means no harm. The mare watched him with wide, cloudy eyes, but there was no aggression in them. Only exhaustion. Only fear. Only love. Jonah whistled softly. "She let you close," he said to Elias. "Closer than she'd let anyone else." "She didn't have a choice," Elias replied, "and she trusted me." Jonah looked at him for a beat too long, not with surprise, with recognition. "It's been a long time since you've handled a horse." "It has," Elias admitted quietly. The wind shifted again, carrying a brief, low rumble across the hills. Jonah stiffened. Elias did too. Ironcrest hadn't gone far. "We need to move," Jonah said. "He's circling. He'll come back." The mare's ears twitched at the sound. She nudged her foal instinctively, as though trying to wake him enough to flee if she needed to. But her legs wouldn't let her. She tried to push herself upright, only to collapse back down, breath shaking. "Easy," Elias murmured, reaching out to let her feel his presence. "We've got you." He turned to Jonah. "I'll drive. Can you stay behind us with your truck? If he charges again, we'll need a second set of lights." Jonah nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, I can do that." After a short pause, he added, "You sure you're up for this?" Elias didn't answer with words. He turned and placed his hand on the mare's mane, the touch light, steady. Her shaking slowed. She blinked at him, eyes softening just enough to make something in his chest twist painfully. "I'm not leaving them," he said. That was all. Jonah got back into his truck. Elias climbed into his own and eased the engine forward, slow enough not to jostle the foal. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the dark, and Jonah's truck followed behind like a shield. The mare lifted her head with each bump, checking on her baby, then lowering it again, as though each movement cost her something precious. The plains stretched wide and empty around them. A few stars broke through the cloud cover, scattering faint light across the cold earth. But Elias felt the night watching them. The ridgelines, the grass, the unseen spaces between rocks. He drove on, each mile stretching longer than the last. Halfway down the slope, the mare tensed suddenly. Elias didn't see anything at first. He only felt the shift in the air. Then, at the edge of his headlights, a shadow broke from the cottonwoods, a dark blur, moving low and fast. Ironcrest. He wasn't charging yet. He was testing, looking for weakness. "Stay with me," Elias murmured, gripping the wheel tighter. Jonah flicked his high beams on, flooding the slope with a wide band of light. Ironcrest slowed, hesitated, then snorted sharply and disappeared back into the brush. Elias heard the mare exhale, a low, wounded tremor that cracked through the quiet. "He'll keep trying," Jonah's voice crackled through the open window. "He won't stop until he knows they're out of his territory." "He'll stop eventually," Elias said. "Tonight he will." They continued downward. Just when the land began to level out, the foal stirred, letting out a cry, higher, louder, frightened. The mare answered quickly, pulling him close with her neck. Ironcrest's silhouette appeared again at the edge of the brush, closer this time. Elias's pulse hammered. He rolled down the window. "Hey!" he yelled, voice fierce, raw. "Back off!" The stallion froze at the shout. Jonah hit the horn once, long and sharp. Ironcrest jolted, stamping the ground, tossing his head in frustration. He paced sideways, breath steaming like smoke, but he didn't cross the boundary of light. Not this time. Not with two trucks between him and his target. When the valley opened again beneath them, the brush thinned. The ground widened enough that Ironcrest finally backed off, melting into the dark with an angry snort. Only when he was gone did Elias feel the tightness in his shoulders loosen. The mare lifted her head and pressed her muzzle against her foal's back, breathing him in. For the first time that night, Elias saw her close her eyes, not in pain, but in momentary peace. Jonah stepped out of his truck, exhaling deeply. That was too damn close. Elias didn't disagree. He only looked at the mare and foal lying pressed together in the bed of his truck. "They're alive," he said softly. "That's what matters." Jonah nodded. "Let's get them home." Elias started the engine again, and as the trucks rolled deeper into the valley, the night behind them finally began to break, its weight lifting, its threat fading, leaving only the long road ahead and the fragile hope resting in the back of a pickup. The valley narrowed as Elias guided the pickup down the winding path, the headlights stretching long, pale fingers across the frost-bitten grass. Jonah's truck followed close behind, its beams sweeping the dark like a second pair of watchful eyes. The night was still tense, but Ironcrest had fallen away somewhere behind them, his presence lingering only as a cold echo in the air. Elias kept checking the mirror anyway, as though vigilance alone could ward off the threat. The mare lay tightly curved around her foal in the truck bed. Though her sides rose and fell with exhaustion, her ears never rested fully. They flicked at each shift of the wind, each distant snap of twigs. The foal pressed against her chest, breathing in small, uneven bursts. Elias slowed the truck as the terrain grew more uneven. He didn't want to jostle the little one any more than necessary. A bend in the valley brought them to a patch where the land opened slightly. A faint glimmer of moonlight revealed scattered boulders and a narrow rise to the west. Jonah honked once, a short, steady signal, then pulled ahead, parking sideways to add more light to the path. Elias parked beside him, stepping down from the cab into the cold night. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Jonah murmured, tilting his chin toward the west slope. At first Elias saw only darkness. Then the wind shifted, and something glinted faintly. Eyes, low to the ground, motionless, watching. Wolves. Not a pack, not tonight, but several silhouettes perched on the ridge, their bodies outlined by thin veins of moonlight. They weren't moving closer. Not yet. But they were watching the wounded mare and her newborn with predatory patience, emboldened by hunger and the recklessness of winter. Ironcrest wasn't the only threat in the hills tonight. The mare sensed them before either man spoke. She raised her head abruptly, breath sputtering from her nostrils in a fast, frightened burst. The foal squeaked, curling tighter against her. "Damn," Jonah breathed. "They're waiting for an opportunity." "They won't get one," Elias said, though the words felt bigger than his voice. He walked to the back of the truck and lowered the gate slowly, letting the mare know he was there. She turned toward him, not aggressively, but pleadingly. Her eyes were full, wide, desperate. Exhaustion tugged at every line in her body, but her gaze burned with a single, unshakable instinct. Protect the foal, no matter the cost. Elias stepped closer, placing a steady hand on the side of her neck. Her coat was warm under his palm, but beneath that warmth he could feel a faint tremor, fatigue, fighting instinct. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," he whispered. Jonah returned from his truck carrying 2 emergency flares, their red casings gleaming softly in the light. "We need to keep them away until we get her moving again. I don't like wolves this close to town." "They're not after us," Elias said, eyes still on the mare. "They're after him." A soft nicker escaped the foal at the sound of his voice, and the mare pressed her chin to its small back, as if shielding it from even the thought of something worse. Jonah cracked a flare. It hissed to life with a bright, angry bloom that lit the slope in pulsing red. The wolves shifted, unsettled by the sudden light, then slipped quietly into the shadows, but Elias knew their retreat was only temporary. They'd circle, they'd wait. They had time, and the night was patient. "We can't stay out here," Jonah said. "We need to get her onto flatter ground, closer to town." Elias nodded. Help me get her to the front of the truck. She can't ride like this the whole way." Jonah hesitated. "You sure she'll let you move her?" "She'll do it for him," Elias said simply. Together they created a narrow path of light using the flares and the headlights. Elias returned to the bed of the truck, bending slowly so the mare could see his hands. "Come on," he whispered. "He needs you to stand." The mare hesitated, her body coiled with uncertainty. She tried once to rise, but her front legs buckled beneath her weight, sending a sharp jolt of pain up her wounded side. She groaned, a soft sound that cut through Elias like a blade. The foal cried out, trying to push himself closer. "Easy, easy," Elias murmured. "We'll do it together." He slid one arm under her neck, the other along her rib cage, careful not to touch the wound, and braced himself. Jonah stepped in too, adding his strength. Together they steadied her, their movements slow, deliberate, respectful. It took nearly a full minute of halting breaths, trembling limbs, and battered will, but finally the mare pushed herself upright. She shook weakly, eyes wide with fear, scanning the ridge for any movement. Elias kept a hand on her shoulder until her breathing steadied. "He's coming with us," Elias said softly, gesturing toward the foal. "You'll be right beside him." Jonah lowered the ramp from his truck, lining it with hay from a small emergency bale they kept for field rescues. Elias lifted the foal gently, settling him on the ramp. At the soft touch of his tiny hooves on the ground, the mare moved forward, nudging him, her body curving protectively around his. Even wounded, even shaking, she lined herself between the foal and the ridge where danger still lurked. "She's got heart," Jonah murmured. "She's got more than that," Elias replied, watching her. "She's got purpose." They guided her toward Jonah's truck. The foal stumbled once, but Elias steadied him. The mare leaned into Elias for the briefest moment, not in fear, but in silent acknowledgement, a gesture so gentle it nearly undid him. Only then did she step into Jonah's truck bed, circling her foal until he was tucked safely beside her chest. Jonah secured the gate and patted the side. "All right, let's get them home." Elias walked back to his own truck. Before climbing in, he glanced up at the ridge one last time. A pair of wolf eyes glowed faintly in the shadows, watching, waiting. But the flares kept them back. For now. Jonah pulled ahead along the narrow trail. Elias followed closely behind, headlights cutting twin ribbons across the sleeping land. The shape of the mare and her foal remained visible in Jonah's rear window, their bodies pressed close, their breaths rising in soft twin clouds. The night was still vast, the dangers still real, but something had shifted, quietly, powerfully. A man who'd once turned away from the world now found himself leading two fragile lives through darkness. And a wild mare, who'd risked everything for her foal, now trusted a stranger to finish the journey she no longer could. Jonah's truck led the way through the narrow valley, its taillights blinking like distant embers in the dark. Elias followed closely, his own headlights sweeping across the winding trail in slow, steady arcs. The land around them had gone completely still. No wind, no rustling grass. No echo of Iron Crest's hoofbeats. But stillness didn't mean safety. It only meant the night had paused long enough to watch. The mare lay curled around her foal in Jonah's truck bed, their silhouettes wavering under the dim interior light. Every now and then, Elias glimpsed the mare's head lift, her ears twitching, her breath misting the small window between them. Even exhausted, she watched the world like a sentinel, never letting danger fall completely out of her sight. A thin frost began to gather along the edges of Elias's windshield. Montana night sank fast, swallowing warmth the way the ocean swallows sound. He turned the heater up a notch, though it did little more than stir the cold air. He wasn't thinking about himself anyway. He was thinking about the mare's wound, about the foal's trembling breaths, about the thin line between surviving the night and not. Jonah slowed as the trail dipped toward a shallow gully lined with low sage and brittle shrubs. Elias rolled down his window. "Problem?" "Road's rough," Jonah called back. "We take it slow." They eased the trucks forward, tires bumping over uneven ground. In the mirror, Elias saw the foal shift, its small body lifting just enough to seek the warmth of its mother's chest. The mare folded her neck around him, her breath brushing the top of his head in soft, rhythmic waves. The scene tugged at Elias in a way he wasn't prepared for. Something in that quiet devotion, the raw, instinctive tenderness of it, reached into a part of him he thought had burned out years ago. Jonah's truck finally reached the flat ground beyond the gully and picked up a little speed. Elias followed, gripping the wheel with the hands that had begun to ache from the tension of holding on too tight. The sky stretched wide overhead, a deep indigo wash broken only by the thin dusting of stars. He remembered driving this trail years ago with his daughter beside him, her boots dangling from the seat, her fingers tracing horse shapes on the fogged window. Back then the world had felt wide but welcoming. Tonight it felt wide but indifferent, like a great silent witness. After several miles, Jonah's brake lights flared red. Elias slowed, pulling up behind him near a solitary cottonwood standing sentinel in the middle of the flats. Jonah stepped out, motioning for Elias to follow. "We should check them again," he said quietly. Elias nodded. The cold bit at his cheeks as he approached the back of Jonah's truck. When they opened the tailgate, the mare lifted her head, ears angled forward, weary but alert. The foal blinked at the sudden exposure to the night, small chest rising and falling with delicate, strained effort. "She's worse," Jonah murmured, crouching beside her. "Her wounds swelling, infections starting." Elias touched the mare's neck gently. She pressed into his palm, not with strength, but with something closer to resignation, not giving up, but handing herself over, placing trust in someone who could do what she no longer could. The foal gave a soft cry. It wasn't loud, but it pushed through the cold air like a thread of urgency. "Let's get them inside," Elias said. They guided the mare and foal out of the truck bed slowly, each movement a negotiation between pain, instinct, and need. The mare's legs nearly buckled twice, but she stayed on her feet, driven by something stronger than fear. She followed Elias across the clearing toward an old abandoned service shed, a place Jonah knew well from his field patrols. Its door groaned open with reluctance, revealing a dim, dusty room with wooden walls and a faint smell of hay left to rot. But it was shelter. And tonight, shelter was life. Jonah lit an old lantern inside. Its glow stretched across the room, painting everything in warm gold. The mare stepped inside, the foal stumbling beside her. Elias spread an old blanket on the floor, laying another over the foal's back. The mare collapsed beside him, her body curling immediately in a protective arc. "She's burning," Jonah whispered, touching the mare's flank. "We have to cool her down." Elias knelt and soaked a towel from the emergency water jug, draping it over her wound. The mare twitched, but didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered open, landing on Elias with a softness that hollowed him out from the inside. "You're all right," he whispered. "You're safe now." Jonah checked the foal's leg. "He'll make it," he said. "He just needs rest." Rest. A word that felt foreign after the night they'd lived through. The shed filled with the quiet hum of lantern light, the rhythmic breathing of horse and child, and the soft murmurs of two tired men. Jonah eventually stepped outside to radio the conservation center, leaving Elias alone with the mare and foal. He sat beside them, leaning against the wall. The mare shifted, lifting her head just enough that it rested lightly against his knee. The contact startled him, not because it was unexpected, but because of what it meant. Wild horses didn't rest on humans. They didn't choose closeness unless something deep inside them believed it was safe. Elias didn't move. He didn't speak. He let her stay there, the weight of her trust warming him more than the lantern ever could. Minutes slipped by, maybe hours. The foal occasionally whimpered, and each time the mare answered with a low, comforting sound, pressing closer to him. And each time Elias felt something old inside him shift. A door he thought had long been locked cracked open. He looked down at the mare's head resting against him, the foal curled against her chest, and knew a truth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He cared, not out of pity, not out of duty, out of something deeper, something he hadn't felt since he'd been someone's father. When Jonah returned, his boots crunching softly on the frozen ground, he paused in the doorway, taking in the sight, the exhaustion on Elias's face, the mare resting on him, the foal breathing softly between them. "You okay?" Jonah asked. Elias didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the mare, brushing a hand gently over her ear. She leaned into the touch. "I will be," he finally said. It wasn't just the mare and foal who'd been rescued tonight. Another life, one he thought he had buried under years of silence, had begun to move again. 3 winters passed over the valley, each one carving its quiet marks across the Montana plains. Snow came and went, frost settled and melted. The grass browned, then rose again to its summer green. Seasons folded over one another in the slow, patient way time moves for people who live far from the noise of cities. And for Elias Harper, life returned to a rhythm he hadn't known he still remembered. The shed where he had once spent the longest night of his life now stood repaired, its roof mended, its frame weathered but sturdy. The mare he had rescued, Willow, as Jonah eventually named her, spent her recovery months beneath care from the conservation team. What began as a temporary shelter had turned into a sanctuary, and though she regained her strength, there was always a softness in her eyes reserved only for the man who had lifted her from the dark. Her foal, once small enough to fit against Elias's arm, had grown quickly. Bramble. The name came naturally, fitting for a creature with legs that had been tangled in stone, and yet found a way to run. He had grown into a lean, lively Mustang with a coat that gleamed chestnut red under the sun and eyes bright enough to catch the world at every angle. Elias wasn't involved with the recovery center out of obligation. He came because the silence in his cabin felt smaller now, because the lull of the forge he rebuilt with his own hands no longer needed to fill the whole day. Some mornings he would bring hay or check the fences. Others he would simply sit on the railing and watch Willow graze while Bramble trotted circles around her. He rarely spoke, but Willow didn't need words. She would come close occasionally, pressing her muzzle to the sleeve of his jacket as though greeting someone long familiar. Those moments stirred something deep in Elias. Even a faint ache could be a reminder that the heart still had room for movement. Jonah teased him about it more than once. "You keep hanging around this place, Elias, we're going to slap your name on a staff badge." Elias always shrugged. "I'm just making sure the fences hold." But both men knew it wasn't the fences. There was no replacing the family Elias had lost, no healing tidy enough, no miracle grand enough. But sometimes healing didn't look like forgetting. Sometimes it looked like showing up again each morning without collapsing. Sometimes it looked like placing a hand on the warm neck of a creature who knew something about surviving a night that should have broken her. As spring turned into summer one year, Willow began to roam farther from the fenced recovery area. Her gait, once stiff from the injury, had regained its strength. She walked with confidence now, but always kept a soft watchfulness, as if checking the world twice before letting herself trust it. Bramble followed her everywhere. He had grown bold, testing every boundary, but one sound from Willow would stop him cold. Love has a way of teaching discipline without force. And then came the day. Jonah made a careful printout and tacked it onto the wooden post outside the shed. Approved. Release date. Elias stood beside him, staring at the paper for a long time. "You ready for this?" Jonah asked. "I'm not the one leaving," Elias replied quietly. They talked little that morning. Instead, Jonah loaded the gate trailer, checked the documents, and walked Willow and Bramble through the final health checks. Willow nudged Elias once on the arm as if searching for something in his eyes. Bramble circled him, tail flicking and energy buzzing under his skin. Jonah motioned to the open field. "You want to do it?" Elias hesitated. His throat tightened unexpectedly, but he stepped forward and unlatched the gate. Willow held still, her body poised at the threshold as though memorizing every wind pattern that brushed her coat. Then she stepped away from the pen, slow at first, then faster. Bramble kicked once into the air, letting out a sharp squeal, and bolted after her. In a few seconds they were swallowed by the rolling grasslands, two shapes receding into the swell of the earth and sky. Elias didn't move until long after Jonah had clapped a hand on his shoulder and walked away. When he finally turned back toward his truck, the land felt emptier than before, but not in the devouring way grief had once emptied it. This was a gentler ache, the kind that stirs after watching someone you love step into the life they were meant to live. Life settled again. Quiet days, quiet nights. He repaired saddles now and then for a nearby ranch, though he never rode himself. He tended his cabin, fixed fence posts, and filled his evenings with the familiar whistle of the kettle and the soft sigh of wind against the windows. And yet, some dusks, he found himself looking toward the valley, searching the far horizon. It was early autumn on the third year when everything changed again. Elias had driven out to check a set of old trail cameras along the southern ridge. The day was winding toward its close. Clouds painted soft lavender across the sky, the wind tugging gently at the collar of his coat. He walked the trail alone, the rolling hum of insects and the muted whisper of grass filling the silence around him. His boots pressed into the earth, leaving crisp impressions that trailed behind him like breadcrumbs. The last camera was perched on a post near a rise of stone. Elias adjusted the lens, brushed off the dust, and was turning to leave when a low vibration passed through the ground beneath his feet. Not thunder, not machinery, something alive. He straightened. Then the sound came again, hooves, not frantic, not territorial, just steady, possessed of a quiet confidence that made the air tighten around him. Elias walked around the boulder, scanning the crest of the hill. On the opposite slope stood a small gathering of wild mustangs, 5, maybe 6. Their coats shimmered under the dying sunlight, manes twisting in the wind like strands of ink and gold. They grazed calmly, paying little mind to the man watching them. But one horse stood apart. A chestnut stallion, tall and sure-footed, with a coat that glowed like copper in the sun's last breath. He lifted his head slowly, looking across the distance. His mane whipped once, catching the wind. His eyes locked onto Elias with a startling familiarity. Elias felt the breath leave his chest. "Bramble," he whispered. The stallion stepped forward, descending the slope in a smooth, powerful gait. He approached without fear, without hesitation. When he stood just a few yards away, Elias could see it clearly, the faint crescent-shaped scar near his hind leg, the mark of the night that changed all their lives. Bramble stopped in front of him, lowering his head in a gentle, deliberate gesture. A greeting. A memory. A thank you. Elias reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the warm side of Bramble's face. The stallion leaned into the touch. A weight Elias had carried for years softened, dissolving in the quiet between them. "You remember," Elias murmured, voice breaking in the cool air, "after all this time." The world held still around them, the ridge, the sky, the grass bending in the wind. No urgency, no darkness, just the solemn peace of two lives that had once collided in fear and found each other again in the calm. Bramble nudged his hand gently, then lifted his head toward the horizon where the rest of the mustangs stood waiting. For a moment Elias could almost see Willow among them, strong, healed, watching her son return to the one human she had trusted. The stallion turned, walking back toward the herd, but halfway up the slope he paused, looking back one final time. Elias nodded, a small, quiet gesture, the kind that carries everything the heart is too full to say. Then Bramble trotted away, merging into the sweep of the plains as the sun slid beneath the hills. Elias stood there long after the horses vanished, his hand still warm with the memory of the touch. Some bonds, he finally understood, are shaped not by blood, but by choosing to stay when the night is heaviest. The light was slipping away when Elias finally turned back toward his truck. Evening had settled over the valley the way a soft wool blanket settles over tired shoulders, slow, deliberate, gentle. A thin ribbon of wind drifted across the ridge, carrying the last warm breath of autumn before winter's first edge arrived. Yet Elias barely felt the cold. His mind was still caught in the quiet wonder of what had just happened. Bramble, no longer a trembling foal pressed into his coat, but a full-grown stallion, strong, sure, alive, had remembered him. Not just remembered, he had sought him. Elias walked slowly, boots brushing through the brittle grass. The sky above him stretched wide and open, streaked with fading orange near the horizon and deep indigo overhead. Stars waited just beyond the light, ready to descend when the sun fully surrendered. The air smelled faintly of sage and dust, the way Montana always smelled at the end of a day, when the entire world seemed to sigh. He opened the door of his truck and paused, staring back toward the rise where he'd last seen the herd. Nothing moved there now, just wind and grass and the lingering echo of hoofbeats fading into memory. Yet his heart beat a little faster, the way it used to when he was younger, when the world felt alive with possibility. He wasn't sure if he liked that feeling. It had been a long time. The drive home was quiet. The gravel crunched beneath the tires in steady rhythm, each small vibration humming through the steering wheel into his palms. Shadows lengthened across the plain as the sun disappeared, and in the growing dark, Elias felt something inside him settle, not heavy like it once did, but calmly, like dust drifting back to earth. By the time he reached his cabin, night had wrapped the land. The porch light flickered once before holding steady, casting a warm, muted glow against the wooden siding. He stepped out of the truck slowly, as though any sudden movement might disturb the fragile peace that had followed him home. The old boards creaked beneath his weight, greeting him with familiar sounds. He slipped inside, hung his coat on the peg near the door, and lit the small lamp on the table. The cabin warmed gradually, shadows softening along the walls. Elias stood for a moment, hands resting on the back of a wooden chair. He felt the quiet move through him the way a slow river moves through a valley. Gentle, persistent. He boiled water for tea, listening to the kettle whistle faintly, then sat down at the table with the warm mug between his hands. A photo frame sat near the lamp, dusty, edges worn. Inside it, 2 smiles shone beneath the brim of a summer hat, his wife laughing, his daughter, her small hand gripping his sleeve with childlike certainty. Elias touched the glass lightly, not to erase the dust, but to acknowledge it. "I saw him," he whispered into the stillness. "The foal, he's grown." The words were simple, almost too soft for the room to catch, but saying them brought a strange trembling to his chest. Not pain, not grief, something lighter, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in far too long. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the mug seep into his palms. He didn't see the valley, or the ridge, or the herd running through the golden hour. He saw the moment Bramble pressed his face into his hand, saw the trust in his stance, the recognition in his eyes, saw the quiet miracle of a wild creature returning to acknowledge the thing humans often struggle to offer freely: gratitude. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the cabin's frame. Elias lifted his head and listened, not for wolves, not for thunder, for something else. A hum beneath the cold, a whisper. He stood and stepped onto the porch. The land stretched before him, dark and endless. The moon had risen now, laying a silver sheen over the hills. Then, far in the distance, barely more than a silhouette, a shape crested the ridge. A lone mustang, chestnut coat glinting faintly beneath the moon. Bramble. Returned again. This time he didn't come close. He didn't need to. He stood on the ridge in perfect stillness, like a guardian carved from shadow and memory. Elias stepped forward until his boots reached the edge of the porch. The night pressed around them, silent and intimate. Bramble lowered his head, a greeting, a farewell, both spoken without sound. Elias felt something shift deep inside, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. He lifted his hand slowly, palm open in the moonlight. The stallion remained a moment longer, then turned and drifted back into the hills, merging with the night as though he had been made from it. The world grew still again. Elias stayed on the porch long after Bramble vanished, the cold brushing gently against his face, the quiet settling around him like an old friend. He realized then, in a way that felt almost like waking up, that the loneliness he had lived with for years wasn't a prison. It was a space waiting to be filled again. And somehow, over 3 winters and countless quiet moments, a mare fighting for her foal had taught him how. He stepped back inside, closing the door softly behind him. Some broken things, he thought, don't stay broken. Some things learn how to bend. Some things learn how to return. He sat once more at the table, lifting the warm mug to his lips. He smiled, small, private, but real. Because out on the ridge, somewhere between the light and the dark, a horse had remembered him, and in doing so, had reminded him how to live. If this story touched you even a little, just leave a simple comment below. You don't need to write anything long. Even a single word lets me know you felt something here today. And if you'd like to join me for more quiet, heartfelt stories like this one, consider subscribing. I'll be right here, waiting to share the next journey with you.